If you do this thing, you may be cheating in Magic. So recently, I went on Twitter, which was also a mistake that I make on a regular basis, and I heard about something interesting. There was a conversation going around about how weaving and pile shuffling are two of the most cheaty ways to shuffle, and they aren't really shuffling, they're just cheating, they're stacking your deck. Now, if you don't know what those terms mean, let me explain to you what weaving and pile shuffling are. So mana weaving or weaving is pretty straightforward. It's taking one mana and then a card and just putting them so that every other card or every other couple of cards, you're having your mana. Essentially guaranteeing that your mana is evenly distributed throughout your entire deck. Now, this is pretty common to see in newer players. This is something that like you just do maybe when you first built your deck, you mana weave so that you don't have your mana all clumped up in one spot, rather than having to spend forever shuffling it to get it to where it needs to be. The other form of cheating, shuffling, is when you take a pile of cards and you literally create piles on your board, and you just start like kind of repiling them, and then you say that's shuffled. So obviously these don't sound super great, and some of you might be a little guilty of doing this. Now, I wanted to bring this up because I think this is an interesting conversation, and one that needs to have a little bit more light shed on it without just saying you're cheating, you suck, and if you do this, you're the worst person. Now, I will fully admit I may or may not have mana weaved and pile shuffled quite a bit in my life, and maybe I may or may not do some of that still to this day. But I want to talk about why I do it and why I'm not afraid to talk about it, because it's not a big deal, and anyone who whines about it is a little bit of a baby, and that's just my opinion. Can't handle it? Well, let's talk about it. So first off, let's talk about mana weaving, because I think that one's much easier to argue, and I want to talk about it in a little bit of detail. First off, I don't have a problem with people saying mana weaving's cheating. I genuinely think it is cheating, because it's guaranteeing that every game you play that your mana is not going to clump. Does it suck when your mana clumps? Yes. And I think that people who are like, I want that, I hope that happens to you, they're also kind of, a jerk too. And I don't think that's fun. And ultimately, Magic is, believe it or not, about fun. And I know some people even think that competitive should be fun. So, and I'm sure some people think, well, no, I want to play it fair and stuff. That's fine. But I think mana weaving can be okay in certain situations. So let's talk about those situations. Number one, mana weaving when you're first building a deck is absolutely acceptable in my mind. If you think that you have to shuffle naturally until you get a pure shuffle, so when you've just built a new deck, is ridiculous. Like typically, mana weaving until you have all your lands, fully spread out, and then you just shuffle it properly, either after you've mana weaved, or shuffle it multiple times when you're playing the actual game. Ultimately, this isn't going to make any super significant impacts. Now, of course, I'm only speaking to the casual format. I'm not going to tell you how competitive rules should be. Competitive rules should play by the book, so you should definitely not mana weave. That would be pretty lame, right? Because you really, really want it to be completely random. But in a casual game, someone having a slightly better distribution of lands should not make your whole world explode. And if you have a problem with that, you genuinely take this game way too seriously, and you gotta calm down. Like, it's really like you've really seen this just absolutely ruin your whole day. Like, is this such a problem for you that it's just like, oh man, this kid that just bought a pre-con, oh man, he mana weaved. Oh, I can't play. Meanwhile, you're spending like thousands of dollars on a deck, and it doesn't matter if you have a couple lands clumped up occasionally. Like, it's stupid. And also, it's mainly about getting a good hand anyway. And typically, my group is very, very lenient with mulligans, because we want to hope that people have a decent hand, not just a crap hand because we want it to be fair. We want it to have fun. We want to have people have actually a good time. And I know that's an impossible concept for some people, but in Magic, for me, I want people to have fun. I don't know. Is that a bad thing? Maybe it is. I have no idea. But that's why I think mana weaving is not that criminal. It is cheating, especially if you're doing it before every single game, when in reality, you can shuffle. And so I stopped doing that after a while. I talked about it with my friends. We had done it for a little while. A couple of us had been mana weaving just because it was like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. We're going to shuffle it later. Statistically, it does make a massive change, but like actually in actual gameplay, we're all running basic lands with no fetch, nothing. It's really not going to be a sizable change. Other than the fact that like after a while, it gets a little frustrating because if you have people who are normal shuffling and they do have those situations where they get mana screwed, and you're just never mana screwed because you're always mana weaving, that's lame, and I don't want that. And I think that's when the line needs to be drawn, because when you have a nice deck, you shouldn't. That's like over $200. Why are you mana weaving at that point anyway? So the consensus that I've found is that don't mana weave any point after you've first built the deck. Mana weave when you first built the deck, shuffle it a bunch, and then as you play it more, you're going to eventually get it into a true random, and I think that's a good thing. I really don't see why that's ruining people's days. And it's not. It's genuinely only ruining people who care that much about Magic, which is fine. You're welcome to care that much. But what about pile shuffling? Is that a really criminal offense as well? Yeah, I mean, pile shuffling is weird because, like, I tend to do this weird thing because the sleeves are terrible, and sleeves make it really hard to shuffle properly. And so I can't shuffle very well. And so if I try to shuffle, it actually ends up just being worse for me. So I don't get even a true shuffle anyway. So I typically try to shuffle the best I can, and then pile shuffle so I'm getting more of a true random, and then shuffling again. Because genuinely, hello, this is future Brandon talking to you right now about how I may or may not have messed this whole conversation up because I didn't read the definition of pile shuffling because I had never heard of it. So I thought it was something else, and then I was like, oh, I'm a dummy. And then I was like, oh, I should fix that in the video. And then I just kind of like made a section of the video correcting myself. So here's that section where I correct myself, but I just want to let you know ahead of time. Okay, love you, bye. Also, just quickly doing a little bit of a fact check on myself as well, because I wanted to make sure I mentioned this part. When you're pile shuffling, you're also typically making piles, and then you're putting cards in each one of those piles. That is the main issue with pile shuffling. The way I was saying it just a second ago made it sound like I was just taking piles and putting them and then like putting them back in. That's still, to me, not totally fair. But even what's more unfair is when you take one pile, like say the pile that you just played with, and then you're like, oh, I want to make sure all these are in random, and then you just like do that. And so it's giving you an unfair advantage in that way because you know that you've separated those cards, and that's just not fair because, again, you shouldn't know where any cards are at all. That's just dumb. So what's the consensus of this? I think pile shuffling is probably the worst. I think if you're pile shuffling, you probably should stop, especially if you're not new at the game anymore. Probably chill out on it. Maybe talk to your friends about how they feel. If you all don't have a problem with pile shuffling, great. But typically what happens, or what it devolves into, is some people take advantage of it if they know it's okay. And I think that's not okay. And this is the thing that I wanted to say about this whole argument is we really have to think a little bit more about the intention of why people shuffle badly. Like, some people just genuinely don't know and haven't really learned the rules of shuffling. And that doesn't make it okay, but it also doesn't mean that they are intentionally doing something wrong. But a lot of people who are in this conversation say it as if they're angry at these people. Now, I don't want to call out anybody or bring up the drama necessarily with anybody, but just from some of the conversations I've seen on Twitter about this, it really does seem like there's a little bit of aggression towards the people who are bad at shuffling or do this intentionally or whatever. But I really think that most of the time, at least the experience I've seen, and especially my own personal experience when I did do it, there was absolutely no harm in what I was trying to do, and there was no desire to cheat in any way. Now, does that change the fact that it is cheating? No, it doesn't make a change in that. It is cheating, and you need to be aware of that. So I don't have a problem with people bringing awareness to this, but I do have a problem with people giving people a hard time. One of my least favorite things about games and video games and Magic and tabletop games, all this stuff, is when we get so competitive that it's no longer about enjoying a space with people or having fun or just trying to enjoy Magic in general, having a good time with your life, like spending a Friday just like with your friends and people you like. It always turns into, I want to win this game. It's all about winning. It's all about, blah, 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 blah. Let me do all these technical things. And I think it loses the soul of what playing tabletop games is all about. Now, of course, there is a competitive element about it, and it shouldn't be criminal to be like, hey, I don't want to be playing with people who are cheating. And I think that's totally fair. So that's all I have to say on this one. Don't mana weave. Don't pile shuffle. Definitely don't pile shuffle. And learn how to shuffle. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Try it out. Learn it. Those are things that shouldn't happen. As far as me, I'm probably gonna still mana weave new decks. I'm probably gonna still do that. I think I have no problem with that. And if anyone did have a problem with it, that's okay. I can change my ways too. But ultimately, it's never out of a desire to cheat. So I don't know. Figure it out. Subscribe if you want to. That's it. That's all I want to talk about. Do you like cheating Magic? Let me know, because so do I.